Hello, I'm Thomas, and I'm going to be reviewing Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. This is going to be part of a larger series on how Norse mythology has been handled in role-playing games, starting with the various editions of D&D, with the D&D-like Castles and Crusades book called Codex Nordica, and also RuneQuest Rolemaster, if anyone remembers that game. Um, GURPS, of course, which had two editions of a Vikings book, another RuneQuest book for RuneQuest 2, and Symbaroum, a more modern take on Norse mythology in a sort of Norse-like fantasy world. So let's get started here with the granddaddy of them all, Gods, Demigods, and Heroes by Rob Kuntz and Jim Ward. This book was published in 1976. It was just 2 years after the original D&D box set was published. It was the fourth supplement. See, it's called Supplement 4 of the original D&D line. And it completes the 7 books that make up the original D&D line. And that is if you do not count Chainmail or Swords and Spells, which for purposes of this review, I'm not considering these part of D&D, although um, obviously they're closely associated with it. And Swords and Spells says it can be used with D&D, but that kind of deserves its own review. So I'm going to set these aside for now and dig into Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. It was edited by Tim Kask, who is a very interesting guy. You can find interviews with him online, and I recommend that you do so. He's got a lot of great stories about the very early days of TSR, and they're very entertaining to listen to if you're at all a aficionado of TSR history. So we're told in the forward that this is the last D&D supplement, and that we've told you just about everything we can. That's right, everything we can tell you. And so the rest of it is just guidelines. There's no true rules, so you can wing it if you want. Apparently, this book was in some part, motivated as a response to what was happening at the time in what was called Monty Hall campaigns. Tim Kask was the editor of Strategic Review, the predecessor to Dragon Magazine, and he got a letter from a fan that says, "Dear TSR, I don't know where to go with my campaign next. Last session, my players went to Valhalla. They killed Loki, all the Valar, a dozen Valkyries, Thor and Odin, and destroyed the Bifrost Bridge. Please help." So in response, I think Gary said, "Well, we'll give them gods and show them how powerful gods are with only 300 hit points. Odin has 300 hit points, and this will show them how ridiculous their 40 plus level characters are, and no one will take them seriously." If that was their intent, that this would sort of shame the Monty Hall players, it was not what happened. Because they give them combat stats in this book, this became a high-level monster book, and even more so in its sequel, Deities and Demigods, for first edition. Let's move on this and describe this book in more detail. So it has 11 mythologies, from Egyptian to gods of India, Greek, Celtic, Norse, Finnish, Central American, and Mexican. It kind of mushes Aztec and Mayan together a little bit, Chinese and Japanese mythologies. But the real star of the show, the thing that makes this book worth getting. That is so the coolest thing about this book is that it has two mythologies that are gleaned from well-known fantasy writings. The uh, the stories of Conan the Cimmerian in a section on Hyborian mythology, Robert Howard's Conan, and a section uh, on Melnibonian mythos, Michael Moorcock's Elric books, Elric and Melnibone storyline. And this alone, the stats here and the descriptions of the characters, is worth the price of this book. Uh, well, back in the day when it was just a few bucks. Now, to get it online, I think it goes for a lot more. It can go for 40, 50, 60 bucks or more. Now, the thing is, Rob Kuntz, as far as I can tell, did not have a college degree. I think he just had a high school education. Now, Jim Ward did have college. I think he had a bachelor's degree in teaching, so he lends some weight to the book a bit here. But you wouldn't know it from reading this book. It's not very scholarly. In fact, if you were to use these write-ups on mythologies, you wouldn't even be able to pass a basic mythology survey class at a community college. Uh, Much has already been said in various reviews of the sort of inaccuracies and where this kind of falls short in explaining the myths that it's dealing with. But I don't grade it. I don't grade this book that harshly. The way I look at this book is it is the result of hobbyists. These are guys that just like playing games, and you can picture them in a garage uh, on a typewriter, just typing away and reading Marvel Comics Thor to get their ideas of what Norse mythology is. Okay, that might be a little harsh. I think they probably read a little bit more than that, but the it definitely has that feeling to it of a survey class and not particularly um, accurate. So each of the mythologies gets 2, 3, sometimes 4 pages, except Norse mythology. This is by far the largest section, and it's like over 9 pages, uh, um, almost 9.5 pages on gods and giants and creatures and magic items from Norse mythology, which it's pretty great. And Odin, I think of all the gods covered in this booklet, Odin gets the longest treatment. It's really, if you were to include Sleipnir, which is his horse, he gets like a page and a half. So it describes Odin. It gives him an armor class of 2, which I have no idea how they came up with that armor class. Almost all of the entries in Norse mythology has an armor class of 2. You can see that 2. Thor has an armor class of 2. Tyr, Bragi, Balder, all these Heimdall, they all have an armor class of 2. It makes no sense to me, and especially if you look at Odin and realize that um, he has look at this. It has a corselet of mail +5 and a helmet +5, right? So mail armor is going to give you an armor class of 5, and then you add the +5. That would be a 0 right there, and then another +5. That's going to be a -5 armor class at a minimum, I would think. So I don't. It's a little puzzling. Another interesting thing is that all of the gods are given psionic ability, and in the very beginning of this book, it explains how it handles psionics, and it says that it breaks it down into 6 classes of psionics of various powers, um, and essentially uh, 1 is the most powerful, and it goes down from there, 6 being the weakest. But the thing about having a psionic class of 6 uh, makes you invulnerable to all psionic attacks. So in some ways, 6 is sort of the best to have. And we know psionics was always a weird fit for old D&D. So for some reason, Odin has class 1 psionics. I think I would have given all of the Norse gods a psionic ability of 6, just to say that, they don't have psionics and they're immune to them, because it doesn't really fit in with Norse mythology. Now, some of the nice things here is it explains that Odin has the ability to change into any animal, any normal sized animal, or he can become a dragon or a humanoid, which, especially the part about humanoid, Odin is always appearing as a stranger in the sagas and various stories, and thinly disguised. Like, oh, there's an old man with one eye, and there's some ravens flying around. I wonder who this could be. And it's Odin, even though he goes by all these different names. And it would have been nice for them to have mentioned some of the different names that Odin goes by here. Um, and they give him a rune wand, which I'm not entirely clear where they got this idea from. This is a pure extrapolation, turning Odin into a D&D character, which I suppose is the point here. But his rune wand acts as a rod of rulership, which you have to see the Greyhawk book for. He can summon elementals of his choice. He can conjure or dispel demons, which you have to look at Eldritch Wizardry for. He continually emanates an anti-magic spell, and Odin's magic can work through this spell. That's interesting. So no spells essentially work on him. It stores 12 spells of his choice. Doesn't seem very powerful. And it drains 6 energy levels or 100 points for every melee round it is held by any other god than Odin. Okay, that's cool that no one else can hold it but Odin. And any mortal that touches it instantaneously dies. And is an artifact, so it's not detected by detect magic. So that one's the only odd one. To me, the other ones make, well, maybe the bow doesn't really make sense either. But certainly, Gungnir, his spear that never misses, although it says it gives it a +5, they could just say it never misses. I think would have been better, more accurate. Um, and this one, Dropnir, his ring that produces gold, this is pretty accurate. I think saying that it produces 10,000 to 60,000 gold pieces every night, that fits the mythology pretty nicely. Odin also keeps his possession 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, of course, thought and memory, and they're always bringing him news. So treat these ravens as normal birds for attack, though they are very intelligent. They are really forced to do any fighting due to their cleverness. I don't know if I would treat them as just normal birds, maybe. And also it mentions Freki and Giri, his wolves. But it says that instead of giving him stats, it says to treat them as werebears. And this is something that kind of I find a little annoying in here is that uh, if you're going to mention them, you should give them the stats so that the players don't have to go thumbing through and look up werebears in one of the other books. Do you just get freaking Gary's stats? Same thing with Sleipnir. It's kind of funny that Sleipnir, uh, his 8-legged steed, Loki's Loki's offspring, which it doesn't even mention here. There's so many interesting things in Norse mythology they could have brought up as they're describing these things. Because there's such a real humor, sort of a grim humor to Norse mythology. This reads a little dry to me. Anyways, Sleipnir, he's treated as a paladin's horse. Cool. And he can teleport itself and his burden once per day at the rider's command. I guess that makes sense. I'm not sure. Teleport. I'd give him that specific ability. Only Odin may mount Sleipnir. That makes sense. Something that would have been really nice to have in here are some maps. Like a picture of the 9 realms and showing Yggdrasil, Midgard circled by the Midgard serpent. This book in general has very, very little art, and the art it does have appears to just be some kind of clip art they got somewhere. All right, so you see, Odin gets the most attention in this book. Thor gets a pretty good little treatment here, although his ability uh, with Mjolnir, um, I should read this because it really sounds like the Marvel Comics Thor, not the Norse mythology Thor. Mjolnir, the magical hammer of Thor. This hammer, when wielded by the thunder god, will slay any giants it hits, and it never misses. Commonly, the hammer is thrown and returns to Thor. Its range is not restricted as is the dwarves +3 hammer. I guess it's mentioned somewhere else. And as long as there is a target in sight, the hammer will hit. That's what it should say about Gungnir. Gungnir should always hit. When used in any other capacity besides the slaying of giants, the hammer will cause 10 to 100 points of damage. That makes sense. Another property of Mjolnir is that of throwing up to sighting distance a bolt of lightning with a varying strength from 2 to 24 8-sided dice of damage. The intensity of the bolt is controlled by Thor himself. Lastly, the hammer shines a light blue color, thus warning Thor of imminent danger. Maybe that's where Tolkien got the idea for Sting. Within 10 to 60 yards of himself. Only beings with strength equal to a frost giant may pick up and carry this item of power, and only Thor himself may use Mjolnir. That makes sense. The only thing missing is if they really wanted to make it like the Marvel Thor, is that he could throw it and use it to fly. So the other gods that are in here, have a decent little write-up, but they're all pretty short. And I don't know what it is about early D&D books. They hated alphabetizing. Like, they just would never put anything in alphabetical order. It makes no sense. Like, why? Okay, I get it. Like, Odin first. Cool. He's the Allfather. He's the supreme god of Norse mythology. But from that point on, couldn't you have it in some kind of order that we could actually look these things up? I suspect probably it's the way it was produced, though, where they typed this up on a typewriter. But, they could have written out a list, alphabetized it, and written it up. And when you do paste ups, I've worked in printing before. When you do paste ups, you get each of these blocks of print. You can cut them and arrange them in any order you want to. And then this section at the end, other giants, gives a one sentence description of Mimir. Guards the well of wisdom, from which he has let only Odin drink. No description of how you get the wisdom, that you have to sacrifice something. Odin sacrificed his eye. That would have been an important detail to make this game relevant information. Strukadr, Hymir. Some of these, it's pretty random, the selection of some of these other ones. Like, I totally understand having Mimir, that makes sense. Surtur. And here we have the Fenris Wolf. Oh, we have Garm and the Fenris Wolf, which, there's a debate whether or not Garm and Fenris are actually the same. You read different things from different scholars about that. But I like to treat them as different anyway, so I like seeing that they're have separate entries. The Midgard Serpent, Jormungandr, dragons. It does mention Fafnir, which is good, but it would have been nice to have some stats for these dragons. Like, I don't care so much about having stats for Midgard Serpent because he's so huge. He circles the entire, Midgard. You're not going to ever fight him, or what are you going to do? Okay, you're going to hit him, and he has infinite hit points. But then Fafnir, you might actually fight him and get his treasure, right? You want to kill Fafnir so that you can drink his blood and talk to birds, right? Nidhugg, or probably Nithug. This dragon dwells below the tree Yggdrasil, where it gnaws relentlessly. Oh, Nithug, of course. That is unusual spelling. I don't think I've seen Nithug spelled that way before. Often this dragon helps Nithug in his duties. All right, and the dwarves given a little treatment. The light elves, the dark elves. That's cool, but no, again, no stats. And then he gets a little bit into broader Scandinavian folktale with The Nisses probably has Huldra in here. A neck. Merman. A lot of people don't realize that merfolk come from Norse mythology. Of course, the Little Mermaid, right? Fostergrim. This is all from Scandinavian folktales more so than specifically Norse mythology. And then it mentions the Sigurd Saga. This saga contains much of interest to D&D players. However, only some of the highlights are listed here. Further reading is recommended. And we have no stats for Sigurd. We do get information on these magic items: Hauberk of Gold, Helm of Dread, and some other things here. Oh, interesting. They have two entries on Fafnir when he was a dragon, and when he was before he became a dragon, when he was just a normal man. Treat Fafnir as an 8th level fighter with the ability of changing shape into a dragon. I wonder why they would separate those entries into two different things. And a final note on Norse mythology. Unless otherwise stated, gods can assume any shape or size they wish, up to Titan height, and their clothes and weapons will conform to any new height. Maybe that would make sense for Jotun, but not for all the Norse gods. And it doesn't even mention the difference between the Aesir, the Vanir, and Jotuns, which would have been, it's kind of an important distinction in Norse mythology. Also, curses were often used, and it is suggested that any magic-using being be allowed a dying curse, or if he has been unjustly wronged. The power of the curse will be judged by how high a level magic user the being was who cast it. It is highly suggested that if the reader wishes to incorporate these additions into his or her campaign, that he do some further study and research into Norse mythology. Books on this subject may be obtained at your public or school libraries. It will add much realism to the game. In other words, read more, kids, which I kind of wish the authors had done a little bit more reading and research here. So, no review of this would be complete without talking about the special edition of Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. Because unless you buy an old copy off of eBay or something, this is the only version that is really going to be available. This is, you can buy the PDF. I don't think there's a print-on-demand version available. Maybe there is, but I don't think there is. And a couple things about this. There's some good things and some not so good things about this. One weird thing is that the book is shorter and wider than the original books. Just a very strange decision aesthetically. Um, but the good thing is how crisp the printing is, how legible everything is, um, and the font that they chose to use inside is sort of a Helvetica font compared to uh, uh, this serif font that they use here, something like Times, whatever. Another nice thing is that they included an index in the new one, which I wish the original had an index. But the strangest thing about this is their choice of cover art. Now, I get it. I mean, Wayne Reynolds is an amazing artist. I love his stuff. But aesthetically, this does not at all feel like the old D&D books in any way. And there are plenty of really great retro artists available that uh, work for the gaming industry. You can see their work all over the place. Very easy to commission them for this kind of work. And another weird thing is that they chose to do Thor with a Mjolnir that has too long a handle, right? The famous thing about Mjolnir is that it has a very short handle uh, in the story of how Mjolnir was created. But the original book has this Egyptian motif, so you'd think they would have done an Egyptian motif for this cover, just so that there would be at least some synergy between the two. But whatever. The biggest crime is that they cut out the Hyborian and Meldemoниan mythos from this book, which was the best thing about the original Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. Now, no doubt it was because of licensing reasons, but how for a company like Wizards of the Coast, how hard could it be to make a licensing agreement to get Conan and Elric in a very short little section of this one time print deal that they did here. So, like I said, this is the first of a series I am planning on doing that covers Norse mythology in role-playing games. And I hope that you enjoyed the review and stay tuned for more. Thank you very much. Take care.